She came with blueprints to erase everything he'd spent his life protecting. And she had no idea the one man she needed to destroy was the only one who could save her. A billion-dollar resort empire. A Texas ranch that had stood for 4 generations. And a little girl who saw through both of them before either one could see through themselves. What started as a business negotiation became something neither of them knew how to name, until the man they both trusted put everything at risk, and the truth about who was really pulling the strings changed every single calculation. Like and comment your city below, and I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me until the very end. This one goes deep. The morning Jackson Reed found the envelope nailed to his front gate, he'd already been up for 2 hours. That wasn't unusual. He was always up before the sun, not by discipline or design, just by the way his body had learned to run. Coffee at 5, feed the horses by 5:30, walk the east pasture fence line before 6 if the weather allowed. Lily would be awake by 7, patting down the stairs in the oversized socks she refused to stop wearing even in summer, asking for oatmeal with too much brown sugar and wanting to know if the baby colt had a name yet. It was the kind of morning that had no room for surprises. The envelope was plain manila, no return address. His name printed in clean block letters. He stood at the gate for a moment, coffee mug in hand, just looking at it. The hinge of the gate had rusted slightly over the winter. He'd been meaning to get to that. There were always things he was meaning to get to. He pulled the envelope free and tore it open without going back inside. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Legal weight stock, the kind that costs more than regular paper without announcing it. The letterhead read Sinclair Capital Group, LLC, in a sans serif font. Below that, in language that was careful and clean and almost friendly if you didn't know how to read what it was really saying. Dear Mr. Reed, we are writing to introduce ourselves and to express our interest in the Reed Ranch property located at County Road 14, Harlan County, Texas. We believe there may be a mutually beneficial opportunity to explore. He read it twice, folded it back along its original crease, put it in his back pocket. Then he finished his coffee looking out at the pasture, at the way the early light was laying itself across the grass in long, flat stripes, and he thought about his grandfather standing in this same spot 40 years ago, probably drinking the same bad coffee, probably looking at something someone had sent him that he didn't want to deal with. Mutually beneficial, Jackson said out loud to nobody. The horses didn't respond. He didn't call the number on the letterhead that day, or the next. He had a fence section to repair on the north edge of the property, a problem with the water pump on the secondary well, and Lily had a school project due Friday that involved constructing a model of the solar system out of materials she'd been collecting for 3 weeks, which meant his kitchen table was currently covered in foam balls, glitter, and what appeared to be a significant portion of his wire coat hangers. Saturn needs more rings, she told him seriously on Wednesday evening, holding up a pale yellow foam sphere wrapped in aluminum foil. How many rings does Saturn have? A lot. That's not a number. She gave him the look she'd been perfecting since she was about 5, the one that suggested she found his literal-mindedness mildly exhausting. It has like hundreds of ringlets. They're made of ice and rocks, but I don't have enough foil. There's more in the second drawer. I already used it. He looked at her. All of it? Jupiter needed it first. Jupiter's very large. He got up, found a roll of plastic wrap in the back of the pantry, and handed it over without comment. Lily examined it with the seriousness of a sculptor evaluating material. This could work, she decided. Jackson sat back down and looked at the letter again, which he'd smoothed out on the corner of the table where the solar system hadn't yet expanded to. He'd read it 4 times by now. He understood exactly what it was. He'd heard about the Sinclair Capital Group. Everyone in Harlan County had, in the way that word travels in small places, part rumor and part warning. A real estate investment firm out of Dallas with serious money behind it. They'd already bought the old Whitmore property 2 counties over, turned it into some kind of high-end event venue and spa thing that charged people who'd never seen a working ranch in their lives $400 a night to pretend they had. He didn't have anything against people spending money however they wanted. That wasn't his business. His business was right here. The 1,100 acres his great-grandfather had filed on in 1931, and that every Reed since had worked, argued over, borrowed against, and loved in the clumsy, unsentimental way that ranchers loved land. Not decoratively, not as scenery, as the actual substance of a life. He put the letter in his desk drawer under a pile of utility bills and went back to helping Lily with Jupiter. Victoria Sinclair arrived on a Thursday. He knew because his nearest neighbor, Dale Pruitt, who ran cattle on the adjacent property and functioned as an informal early warning system for the entire south side of Harlan County, called him Wednesday night. "You know there's a woman coming out to see you tomorrow," Dale said. "I didn't know that." Her assistant called the county assessor's office this afternoon, asked about property boundaries. Linda at the assessor's office told Marcy Ellison, and Marcy told my wife. Jackson leaned against the kitchen counter. "You know the name?" "Victoria Sinclair. She's the one running that capital group. You heard of her?" "I've heard the name." "She's coming herself, not sending somebody." Dale was quiet for a second. "That means she wants the property bad. Or she's the kind of person who handles things herself." "That too," Dale said. "Watch yourself, Jackson." He wasn't sure what watching himself was supposed to look like, practically speaking, but he thanked Dale and hung up. Lily was already in bed. The house was quiet. He stood in the kitchen for a while with the lights on, looking at nothing in particular, and then he went out to the back porch and sat in the dark, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the way you do when something is about to change, and you're not ready to name it yet. She arrived at 9:45 in a silver Land Rover that looked like it had never seen a dirt road before today. Jackson was working on the water pump when he heard the engine. He straightened up, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and walked out to meet her in front of the barn. He didn't hurry. Victoria Sinclair stepped out of the vehicle, and for a half-second she just stood there, taking in the property with the specific kind of assessment that people in her business learned to do quickly. Cataloging, calculating, translating acreage into potential. She was younger than he'd expected. Early 30s, maybe his age. She had dark hair pulled back in a way that was meant to look efficient, and she was wearing clothes that were expensive but not flashy, which he gave her credit for. People who wanted to be taken seriously in rooms with serious men tended to wear expensive but not flashy clothes. It was a calculation. She was carrying a folder. Of course she was. "Mr. Reed," she said, walking toward him with her hand already extended, the kind of handshake posture that got established in business schools and never quite went away. "Victoria Sinclair, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." He hadn't agreed to anything, but he let that pass. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, the way people practiced. His was just his grip. "I got your letter," he said. "I wanted to follow up in person." She glanced past him at the barn, the main house, the stretch of open land beyond. Something moved through her expression. He couldn't quite name it. Not greed exactly. More like recognition, like she was confirming something she'd already decided. "You have a beautiful property." "Thank you. I'd love to have a conversation about some ideas we've been developing for this area. Is there somewhere we could sit down?" He looked at her for a moment. She held his gaze without difficulty, which was either confidence or practice. He wasn't sure yet. "I'll make coffee," he said. His kitchen was not what she had planned for. He could tell by the way she paused in the doorway, just briefly, taking in the solar system still spread across half the table, the work boots by the back door, the chipped enamel coffee mugs he pulled from the cabinet without apology. There was a drawing taped to the refrigerator, a horse with a very large head and a small girl next to it with yellow hair and enormous eyes. Written underneath in a child's careful lettering, "Me and Cooper." Lily had drawn it in January. Victoria sat down across from him at the table. She set her folder on the clear half of the table, carefully, not touching the foam planets, and opened it. "I'll be direct with you, Mr. Reed," she began. "I'd prefer that." She nodded once, like that settled something. Sinclair Capital is developing a project in this county, a mixed-use resort and conservation community, high-end residential, wellness facilities, outdoor experience infrastructure. We've already secured partnerships with several adjacent property owners. The project represents close to $400 million in initial development. He poured coffee into both mugs, put one in front of her without asking how she took it. The final phase of the project, the centerpiece really, Requires access to the springs on the south edge of your property. She turned the folder toward him. There were aerial photographs, renderings, projected traffic flows. The drawings were beautiful in the way that things designed to sell ideas were always beautiful. We're prepared to offer significantly above market value for a purchase. Or we can discuss a long-term access and royalty arrangement if you're not interested in a full sale. Jackson looked at the drawings. He looked at them for long enough that she probably thought he was impressed by them. Those springs have been on Reed land since before I was born, he said. I understand that, which is why we're committed to preserving them as a feature of the development, not... My grandfather built the first irrigation system on this ranch off those springs. My father swam in them when he was a kid. My daughter knows every rock in that creek by name. He looked up at her. She named the rocks. Victoria was quiet. So when you say preserve them as a feature, Jackson continued, his voice not unkind but not soft either, what I hear is that they'll still exist, they'll just exist differently, in a context that has nothing to do with why they matter. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, didn't react to the fact that it was black and strong. That's one way to look at it. Is there another way that's more accurate? Something shifted in her face. It wasn't defensiveness. It was something else. The slight recalibration of someone who came in expecting one kind of conversation and found a different one. Mr. Reed, I didn't come here to argue about the springs. I came here because I believe there's a deal that works for both of us. I'm asking for a conversation, not a concession. He leaned back in his chair. The old wood creaked, the same creak it had made for 30 years. What happens to the people whose land borders mine? Dale Pruitt, the Navarro family, the Hendersons. They've been here longer than any of us. The project plan includes partnerships with neighboring properties. Partnerships or buyouts? She held his gaze. Both options are on the table depending on each property owner's preference. And what happens to the ones who don't want either option? She was quiet for 1 second too long. It wasn't evasion exactly. It was more like she'd run into an answer she didn't have yet. I'm still exploring the project scope, she said finally. Jackson nodded slowly. He looked at the aerial photograph on the table. His land, reduced to geometry, bright and clean, and completely emptied of everything that made it what it was. The photograph was honest in its own way. That was exactly how she saw it. He didn't blame her. It was how she'd been trained to see things. I'm not interested in selling, he said. Not the land, not the water rights, not an easement to the springs. I appreciate you coming out personally. He stood, which was the signal that the conversation was done. She didn't stand yet. She looked up at him, and there was something working behind her eyes that he couldn't quite read. May I ask why? Because it's my land and my daughter's after me, and the people around it have their own lives that don't belong in somebody's resort development. Even if that development could bring a significant amount of money to... Victoria, he said her name not sharply, just plainly. I know what my land is worth. I knew before you showed up. The number you're offering isn't why I'd sell it, and a bigger number isn't why I will. She stood. She picked up her folder, closed it. He noticed she didn't rush it. She was collecting herself, not retreating. That was the difference. I'm going to be in Harlan County for a few more weeks, she said. I'd like to leave the door open. The door is open. Come back whenever. I'll make coffee. A ghost of something crossed her mouth. Not quite a smile. The coffee is very strong. I know. She came back 4 days later. He was replacing a section of split-rail fence along the road when the Land Rover pulled up. This time, she got out without the folder. She was dressed differently, too. Still expensive, but simpler. She walked over to the fence line where he was working and stood about 6 feet back, watching him without pretending she wasn't watching him. You didn't call, she said. You didn't ask me to. I left my card. I know. He pulled a new rail into position and checked the alignment. She watched. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Do you ever get lonely out here? He paused. It was not the question he'd expected. He looked at her and she looked back, and he had the feeling she hadn't quite planned to ask it either. Sometimes, he said honestly. Not usually. How long have you been raising Lily alone? She was 3 when her mother left, so 5 years. He set the rail and reached for the mallet. You did your homework. County records. She was on the deed amendment you filed after your father passed. He struck the post. You want to know if I have financial trouble, whether the ranch is in a position where an offer would be hard to turn down. I want to know who I'm talking to, she said. That's different. He looked at her again. There was something unexpectedly honest about that answer. He wasn't sure he trusted it, but it landed differently than he'd expected. You're talking to a man who's been working this land since he was Lily's age, he said. Who owns it free and clear, who isn't going anywhere. He drove the last stake in. That answer your question? She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the pasture grass behind her. Somewhere distant, one of the horses made a sound. My business partner thinks you're holding out for a higher number, she said. Your business partner doesn't know me. No, he doesn't. She said it in a way that implied something, that maybe she was beginning to understand that this was a problem. Not with Jackson, with her business partner. What's his name? Damian Cole. He manages the operational side of the project. He's been handling most of the local negotiations. She paused. He told me you'd approached several other investors about the springs. Jackson stopped. He turned to look at her fully. He told you what? That you'd had conversations with a water rights broker, that you were trying to negotiate a sale outside our offer. The stillness that came over him wasn't anger yet. It was the thing that came before anger, see? The cold, clear recognition that something was wrong. I've never spoken to a water rights broker in my life, he said. I haven't spoken to anyone about this land except you and Dale Pruitt. She held his gaze. He could see her processing it, recalibrating, the way she'd recalibrated in his kitchen. She was good at it. She did it quickly and without visible discomfort, which told him she'd had practice being wrong about things. Why would Damien tell me that, she said, and he wasn't sure if she was asking him or herself. I don't know. He picked up his tools, but I'd figure that out before you do much else. The third visit, Lily answered the door. Victoria had come at 11 in the morning on a Saturday, which meant Lily was home, which meant Jackson had about 4 seconds between the knock and the moment Lily pulled the door open and stared up at the woman on the porch with complete open curiosity. Hi, Lily said. Hi. Victoria blinked. She had clearly not anticipated an 8-year-old. Is your dad home? He's in the barn. Are you the lady who wants to buy our springs? A beat of silence. Victoria looked down at Lily with an expression that was somewhere between caught off guard and trying not to smile. Yes, something like that. How do you know about that? Dad told me someone was coming to ask about the springs. I asked him what they wanted with them, and he said they wanted to build something. I asked if we were going to let them, and he said no. Lily tilted her head. He said no kind of like how he says no to the dog, when the dog wants to eat off the table. Not mean, just decided. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. That's a very accurate description. You can come in and wait if you want. I'm doing a puzzle. Victoria seemed to reconsider 3 different responses. Okay, sure. Jackson came in from the barn 15 minutes later to find Victoria Sinclair sitting on the floor of his living room with his daughter, both of them focused on a 500-piece puzzle that was a photograph of a mountain lake. He stood in the doorway, and neither of them noticed him for a moment. This piece goes here, Lily said, with the certainty of a person who had been working this puzzle for 3 days and had strong opinions about its geography. I thought it went. It doesn't. See the water reflection? The blue is different on this side. Victoria examined the piece. You're right. She placed it. How did you see that? I look at the colors instead of the shapes, Lily said. Daddy taught me. Jackson cleared his throat. Both of them looked up. You got mud on the door frame, Lily told him. I know. He looked at Victoria. Come on, I'll make coffee. She got up from the floor with the slightly caught expression of someone who'd been discovered doing something they hadn't planned to do. She followed him into the kitchen. She's very direct, Victoria said. She is. She told me I have pretty hair, and also that my shoes are impractical for this environment. Jackson poured water into the coffee maker. She's not wrong about the shoes. Victoria looked down at her heels. They were slightly muddy at the tip. No, she's not. He set up the coffee and turned around. She was standing near the refrigerator, looking at Lily's drawing, the horse with the enormous head, the small, yellow-haired girl. He watched her look at it. "What's the horse's name?" she asked. "Cooper. He's 12. He's been the bossiest animal on this property since he was 2 years old." She smiled at that. A real smile, not a professional one. It changed her face in a way he hadn't seen yet, made her look less assembled, less like a person executing a plan. "I have something I need to talk to you about," she said, the smile going quiet. "About Damien." "I figured. I've been going back through the project documents. There are transactions I don't recognize. Payments to a company called Aqua Meridian Holdings. I've never heard of this company. It's not a vendor we engaged. It's not in any contract I signed. And when I asked Damien about it, he said it was a consulting group he'd brought in for water rights analysis." She crossed her arms. "I don't believe him." Jackson waited. "I think he's been building a separate deal, on top of the resort project, something involving the water rights in this valley, not just your springs, all of them, the aquifer that runs under this entire county." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Lily was talking to herself about the Mountain Lake puzzle, a running, quiet monologue that Jackson barely registered anymore because it was as constant and familiar as the sound of the wind. "That aquifer feeds every ranch in this valley," he said. "I know. If someone gets control of the water rights, I know Jackson." She said his name and then seemed to notice she'd used it, the slight pause of a formality she hadn't made a decision to cross. "I know what it means. That's why I'm telling you." He looked at her. She looked back. There was something different in her now than there had been 3 weeks ago when she'd stood in front of his gate with her folder and her aerial photographs and her careful, practiced handshake. Something had gotten underneath the polish. He wasn't sure yet whether that was good or dangerous or both. "What are you going to do about it?" he said. She took a breath. "I'm still figuring that out." "Figure it out fast," he said. "Because if Damien has already started moving on those water rights, the other ranchers in this valley need to know. And that clock isn't waiting on your internal audit." She held his gaze. He could see the weight of it settling on her. Not just the business problem, but the human one. The understanding of what was actually at stake in language that had nothing to do with portfolios or investment returns. "I hear you," she said. "Coffee's ready." Dale Pruitt came by that afternoon. He sat at the same kitchen table where Victoria had sat that morning, and he told Jackson that his property had gotten a visit from someone claiming to represent a county water board committee he'd never heard of. They'd asked questions about the depth of his wells, the water table, the seasonal flow patterns. Very technical questions. "I don't know anything about a water board committee," Dale said. "Neither do I," Jackson said. Dale looked at his coffee. He was 61 years old, had a bad knee, and had been ranching this county his entire life. He had the specific kind of stillness of a man who had worked through enough hard things to know that panic wasn't useful. But Jackson could see something behind his eyes. "We're not going to lose this valley, are we, Jackson?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. He thought about the springs at the south end of his property. He thought about the drawing on his refrigerator, and Lily's certainty about puzzle pieces, and Victoria Sinclair sitting cross-legged on his living room floor looking genuinely surprised by the color difference in a body of water. "Not if I can help it," he said. Dale nodded. He didn't need more than that. That night, after Lily was asleep, Jackson sat at his desk and pulled out the documents he'd never shown anyone. The trust filing from 1987, the water rights agreement his grandfather had structured before anyone thought to make things complicated, the deed addendum his father had insisted on adding to the primary title in 2004. He spread them out under the lamp. His grandfather had been a quiet man with a methodical mind and a deep distrust of anyone who arrived in Harlan County with big plans and bigger ambitions. When he'd set up the water rights structure, he'd done it in a way that was old-fashioned and slightly obscure and completely airtight. The springs, and the water rights attached to them, weren't in Jackson's name alone. They were held in a family land trust, a trust that predated most of the legal instruments that modern developers use to negotiate around, isolate, or consolidate water rights in Texas. A trust that in 3 different statutes was recognized as irrevocable without unanimous agreement of all beneficiaries. And the primary beneficiary, listed in the original filing and never amended, was not Jackson Reed. It was the Reed Family Land Conservancy, a private entity with no corporate officers, no public filings, and no way to be bought out without the consent of every member of the Reed family bloodline, which, as of the current date, was Jackson Reed and one 8-year-old girl currently asleep upstairs in oversized socks. Jackson looked at the documents for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and stared at Victoria Sinclair's business card for about 30 seconds. He didn't call. Not tonight. But he thought about the way she'd looked at Lily's drawing on the refrigerator, and the way she'd placed that puzzle piece after Lily corrected her, and the way she'd said "I know" twice when he'd told her what was at stake, and sounded like someone who had actually, somewhere between the aerial photographs and the mud on her heels, started to understand what she was dealing with. He put her card in the middle of the documents. Then he turned off the lamp. Outside, the springs ran quietly in the dark, the way they always had, the way they would keep running if he had anything to say about it. The sound didn't carry all the way to the house. It never did. But on still nights, if you stood in the right place on the south pasture, you could hear it. His grandfather had called it the sound of the land keeping its own promises. Jackson listened to the dark for a while. Then he went to bed. Victoria didn't sleep well in Harlan County. That wasn't something she'd admit to anyone, but it was true. The rental house she'd taken for the project stay was a clean, forgettable place on the edge of town. Adequate furniture, a working coffee maker, reliable Wi-Fi. And it should have been fine. She'd slept in worse. She'd slept in hotel rooms in 4 countries on the same week before, cycling through time zones like she was flipping channels, and she'd always been able to shut her brain down when she needed to. Here, something kept pulling her back up to the surface. She'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and instead of project timelines or financial models, she'd find herself thinking about a 500-piece puzzle with a mountain lake, about a child who sorted pieces by color instead of shape, about a man who'd said the number you're offering isn't why I'd sell it with such complete calm that it hadn't sounded like a negotiating position at all. It had sounded like a fact about the nature of the universe. She'd built her career on reading people, understanding what they wanted and finding the version of it she could provide. It wasn't manipulation. She'd always been honest about the framework. She found the gap between what someone had and what they wanted, and she built a bridge. That was the job. That was what she was good at. Jackson Reed did not have a gap she could find. That was the problem, and she knew enough about herself to recognize that it wasn't purely professional frustration. There was something else in it, something she poked at in the dark and then stepped away from before she could identify it clearly. She got up at 6:30, made coffee the way she always did, precise, measured, efficient, and sat down with her laptop and the project files she'd been quietly pulling apart for the last week. Aqua Meridian Holdings had 12 transactions in the project ledger. She'd found the first one 3 weeks ago, flagged it mentally, moved on. She'd found 3 more when she looked closer. Now going back through everything with the specific intention of finding what she'd missed, she counted 12. All labeled as consulting fees, all paid to an LLC registered in Delaware, with no website, no public presence, no verifiable address beyond a registered agent in Wilmington. She called her CFO at 7 a.m. His name was Patrick. He'd been with her company for 6 years, and he answered with the voice of someone who'd been awake for a while. "The Aqua Meridian payments," she said. "Did you approve them?" A pause. "They came through the Harlan Project account. Damien said they were pre-approved." "Did you verify that with me?" Another pause, longer. "He said you'd signed off during the Q3 review." "Patrick," she kept her voice level, "I never signed off on payments to a vendor I've never heard of." The silence on the other end was the specific quality of a person recalculating their own exposure. She'd heard it before. She waited it out. "I'll pull everything I have," he said. "Do it today. Don't tell Damien." She hung up and looked out the window at the main street of Harlan, Texas, just starting to come to life in the early morning. A hardware store. A diner with a hand-lettered sign. A pickup truck turning the corner with a dog in the bed looking serious about wherever it was going. She thought about what Jackson had said. Figure it out fast. because that clock isn't waiting on your internal audit. She drove out to the ranch at 9, not entirely sure why. She told herself it was because she needed to think through the Aqua Meridian problem. And there was something about driving on dirt roads in the early morning that helped her think. That was partly true. She had learned in the past 3 weeks that the landscape around Harlan County had a particular quality of openness. The sky went all the way down to the horizon without interruption, and the light had a flatness to it that wasn't empty so much as honest. It didn't ask anything from you. It just was what it was. She didn't turn into the ranch driveway. She pulled over on the county road and rolled her window down and sat there for a while, looking at the gate, listening to the sound of nothing in particular. A bird somewhere. Wind in the fence grass. Then she kept driving. She went east toward the Henderson property, which she'd visited 6 weeks ago as part of the initial project outreach. The Hendersons, Carl and Ruth, both in their 70s, 4 generations in Harlan County, had been polite and noncommittal. Carl had walked her around the property in his methodical way, showing her the old stock pond, the water lines, the back pasture that ran along the creek. He'd answered her questions carefully. He hadn't said no. He hadn't said yes. He'd said he needed to talk to his kids. She knocked on the door and Ruth answered in an apron, which made Victoria feel vaguely guilty, though she couldn't have said exactly why. "Miss Sinclair," Ruth said. There was no particular warmth in it, and no particular coldness either. "I'm sorry to drop by without calling. I wanted to ask Carl something if he has a minute." Ruth studied her for a moment, a direct, uncomplicated look that reminded Victoria, against all logic, of Lily Reed, and then stepped back from the door. Carl was at the kitchen table with coffee and the remains of breakfast. He was a big man who had gotten slow without getting small, and he looked at Victoria the way men who'd spent their lives working outside looked at people who'd spent their lives in offices. Not hostile, just measuring some fundamental difference in constitution. "Sit down," he said. She sat. Ruth brought her coffee without asking, which Victoria accepted without comment. "Someone came by last week," Carl said, "asking about our wells. Young fella said he was from the county water management office." He looked at her. "You know him?" "I don't think so. What did he ask?" "A lot of questions about depth, water table measurements, whether we'd had any flow changes over the past few years." Carl turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. "He had a tablet with him, was taking notes. Did he give you a name?" "Said his name was Torres. Marcus Torres. Gave me a card." Carl got up and went to a drawer by the sink. He came back with a business card and set it in front of her. Victoria looked at it. Harlan County Water Management Authority. A phone number. She took a photo of it with her phone without explaining why. "Carl," she said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to understand that I'm asking because I'm concerned, not because I'm pushing the development agenda." She looked at him. "Are you aware of any separate approach that's been made to you about selling water rights? Not the resort project. Something different." Carl's expression shifted, just slightly. The way expression shifted in people who had been asked a question they were already thinking about. "About 2 months ago," he said slowly. "Before you and I met, a lawyer called. Said he represented a land management consortium. Wanted to know if I'd be interested in a water rights lease arrangement." "A lease," he said, "not a sale." Carl looked at his wife. "We said no. Ruth didn't trust it." "Smart woman," Victoria said. Ruth, who had been standing at the counter listening, said, "It wasn't the money that bothered me. It was that he kept saying it wouldn't affect our use of the water. That's what salespeople say when it's going to affect your use of the water." Victoria looked at her. "That's exactly right." She drove back toward town with the windows up, thinking hard. The lawyer's call had come 2 months ago, before she'd arrived, before the resort project had even been formally announced to local property owners, which meant Damien had been running this secondary operation independently, ahead of the main project. The resort was cover, or maybe even bait, a legitimate development that gave him access to county records, water data, property surveys, everything you'd need to build a case for a water rights acquisition. She pulled into the parking lot of the county assessor's office and sat in the car. She'd brought Damien in 3 years ago. He'd come recommended by 2 of her most trusted advisors, and he'd been good. genuinely good at the operational side of things, finding deals, structuring access, moving projects through the bureaucratic machinery that slowed everything down. She'd given him significant autonomy because that was the only way to run a company at the scale she ran it. You had to trust the people you worked with, or you spent all your time auditing instead of building. She'd trusted him. The feeling that landed on her in that parking lot wasn't betrayal exactly. It was something more specific and more uncomfortable. The realization that she had made a mistake that had gotten other people's lives tangled up in it. People who hadn't asked to be involved in her business decisions. People who had their own histories and their own springs and their own children who named the rocks. She got out of the car and went into the assessor's office. Linda, at the assessor's office, was a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain who appeared to know the status of every property in Harlan County from memory. She looked at Victoria over those glasses when she came in with the expression of someone who found the entire situation mildly interesting and wasn't particularly going to pretend otherwise. "Miss Sinclair," she said. "Ms. Linda." Victoria had learned her name from the county website. Linda seemed to notice that. "I was hoping to look at some public records, water rights filings, specifically for properties in the South Valley area, going back about 18 months. "That's public record," Linda said. "You're welcome to look." She didn't move. "Anything specific you're looking for? Any transfer filings? Any lease arrangements? Any applications for reclassification of agricultural water rights?" Linda's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Why?" Victoria met her gaze. "Because I think someone in my organization has been using this project as a way to quietly acquire water rights in this valley, and I'd like to understand how far along they are before I decide what to do about it." A silence. Linda took off her glasses and let them hang on the chain. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you the files." She was back in 4 minutes with a banker's box, an expression that had shifted from neutral to something more like collaborative. "I've been watching these filings for about 6 weeks, Linda said, setting the box on the counter. "Wasn't sure what I was seeing exactly. 3 separate LLCs have filed preliminary applications for water rights leases on properties in the valley. None of them are local. 2 are registered in Delaware, 1 in Nevada." "Aqua Meridian Holdings," Victoria said. Linda looked at her. "That's one of them." "What are the other 2?" Linda told her. Victoria wrote them down in the notes app on her phone. Her hands were steady. She was good in situations like this. Her brain got quieter the worse things got, which was either a useful professional trait or evidence of something slightly wrong with her wiring, depending on who was evaluating it. "Do you know a man named Damian Cole?" she asked. "I know of him. He came in here about 5 weeks ago. Said he was doing due diligence for the resort project, asked about aquifer depth reports and county water survey data." "Did you give it to him?" "It's public record." Linda paused. "He was very pleasant about it, very professional, knew exactly what he was looking for." Victoria nodded. She pulled the box toward her and started going through the files. "Osat." She was still at the assessor's office at 1 in the afternoon when her phone rang. It was Patrick. "The Aqua Meridian payments total $480,000 over 14 months, he said. "I found 2 more transactions I missed in the first pass. Damien has signatory authority on the Harlan project account. We gave it to him when the project launched because he needed to move quickly on vendor contracts." "Who approved that authority?" "I did," Patrick said quietly. "He had your verbal authorization, he told me." "Patrick." She closed her eyes for a second. "I need you to do something. I need you to compile every payment made from every Sinclair Capital Project account that had Damien's signature on it. Not just Harlan, every project. Going back 30 months. The silence was very long. "Victoria." "I know, do it. And Patrick, use your personal email. Don't run anything through the company server." She hung up and looked at the filing in her hand. It was a preliminary water rights lease application for the Henderson property, filed 6 weeks ago by Aqua Meridian Holdings. Carl Henderson's name was on it, which meant someone had forged his signature because Carl Henderson had told her 20 minutes ago that he'd never agreed to any such thing. Forgery. Add that to the list. She took photographs of everything, put the box back in front of Linda, and said, "Thank you. I may need to come back." I'll be here, Linda said. She said it with the specific weight of a person who had decided to be an ally and was making that known without announcement. She called Jackson from the parking lot. He picked up on the third ring. She could hear wind in the background, which meant he was outside. "It's Victoria," she said. "I know." A brief pause. "You all right?" She noticed he asked that first, before whatever else. "I need to show you some things. Can I come by this afternoon?" "Lily's got a thing at school until 4. Come after that." "Okay." She hesitated. "Jackson, it's worse than I thought." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through whatever she was hearing on his end. Open air, distance, the particular sound of a place that had been the same for a long time. "How much worse?" "Forgeries on property filings, at least one, possibly more. And the scope isn't just the springs. He's been building documentation on the entire aquifer system under this valley." Another silence. This one had a different quality. "For how long?" "Long enough that it predates this project by at least a year, maybe longer." He exhaled. Not dramatically, just the sound of a person absorbing a weight. "Come at 4:30, he said. "I'll put Lily on the horses." She arrived at 4:20 to find Lily in the paddock on a broad-backed roan mare who looked like she'd been doing this long enough to be bored by it, walking careful circles while Jackson stood at the rail watching. Lily spotted Victoria first and raised one hand in a wave without breaking her posting rhythm. Victoria stood next to Jackson at the rail. He didn't say anything. She didn't either for a minute. "She's a good rider," Victoria said. "She's fearless, which isn't the same thing. She's getting there, though." He watched Lily turn the mare at the corner. "She fell off 3 times last summer, cried each time, got back on each time, didn't tell me about the third fall until a week later." "Why wait?" She said she was waiting to see if the bruise was going to be interesting enough to be worth the conversation. He said it with a flatness that was clearly just barely holding back something warmer. "She has opinions about what constitutes a worthwhile conversation." Victoria looked at the kid on the horse, the concentrated face, the little determined set of her shoulders, and felt something move through her chest that she didn't examine too closely. "She knows something's wrong, doesn't she?" Victoria said. Not a question. "She's 8, not oblivious." He glanced at her sideways. "She asked me last night if you were going to take our springs. I told her you were working something out." "That's a generous description of what's happening." "I know," he called out to Lily. "That's enough for today. Cool her down and get her brushed." Lily made a face at the interruption, but turned the mare toward the gate without argument. She rode with the loose-limbed patience of a kid who'd grown up around animals, not trying to control but just being present with it, which was more than a lot of adults managed. They went inside and sat at the kitchen table. The same coffee mugs, the remains of the solar system project finally cleared away. And Victoria spread out the photograph she'd taken at the assessor's office and walked him through all of it. He listened without interrupting. He looked at each photograph when she set it down. He asked 2 questions, one about the timeline, one about the specific language in the lease application, and both questions were precise and practical, the questions of someone who understood what he was looking at. When she finished, he was quiet. "The Henderson signature," he said. "Can you verify it's forged?" "Carl told me this morning he never agreed to any lease, but proving it legally requires a handwriting comparison. Or this, Carl's signature is on the deed to this property from when my grandfather bought the east fence line from his grandfather in 1978. County Recorder's Office has the original." He looked at her. "Get a copy of that and a copy of the application. Put them side by side." She hadn't thought of that. It was such a direct, practical solution that she felt slightly embarrassed it had taken a rancher to see it. "Okay. What does Damien know about what you're doing?" "Nothing yet. I haven't tipped him." She looked down at the photographs. "He's supposed to be in Austin this week for a regulatory meeting. He gets back Friday." "Does he know you've been out here?" "He knows I'm here. He thinks it's because the acquisition is stalled." She paused. "He called me Tuesday. Told me he thought we needed to consider a different approach with you. Said maybe we should look at eminent domain arguments. Water necessity for regional development." She felt Jackson go still across the table without him moving a muscle. It wasn't dramatic. It was the stillness of a man who had just confirmed something he already suspected. "Eminent domain," he said. I told him no. I told him that wasn't what this project was. He backed off. She looked at him. But he's done the research on it. He had specific statutory language ready. He'd been thinking about it. Jackson got up and went to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the paddock where Lily was still walking the mare in slow, cooling circles. "You know what eminent domain means for the people in this valley," he said. "It doesn't just mean losing land. It means everything falls apart," she said. "I know. I told you I know." He turned around. There was something in his face that was tired and hard at the same time, the look of a man who was adding up a sum he'd been hoping would come out differently. "How committed are you to stopping this?" The question landed directly, and she felt it. "Completely," she said. And she meant it in a way that surprised her. Not just the word, but the actual feeling underneath it, the certainty that had settled into her somewhere between Carl Henderson's kitchen and the assessor's office, and this table, this ranch, this particular evening light coming through this particular window. "Whatever I need to do." He studied her for a long moment. She held still under it. "There's something you need to know," he said finally, "about the springs, about why the water rights on my property are different from what Damien thinks they are." He went to the desk in the corner and came back with a folder. He set it on the table between them. She looked at the first page, a trust filing from 1987 worn at the fold lines, the letterhead of a county attorney's office that probably didn't exist anymore. "My grandfather set this up," he said. "The water rights aren't in my name. They're in a family land trust, an irrevocable trust." He waited for her to read what she was reading. "Even if Damien had gotten me to sign something, which I wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been legally valid. The trust requires unanimous consent of all beneficiaries." She read through the document. She knew enough property law to understand what she was looking at. "Who are the beneficiaries?" "Me and Lily." She looked up at him. "She's 8, he said. "So any contract involving her interests requires court approval and an independent guardian ad litem review." He said it flatly, without triumph. "Just information. Damien doesn't know about the trust. The county records show me as the primary landowner. The trust instrument was filed under my grandfather's name, and it's not cross-referenced with the property deed in any system that would be obvious." Victoria set the document down. She thought about Damien's careful research, his specific statutory language, his tablet full of notes. He'd built an entire strategy on a foundation that didn't exist. He'd been outflanked by a dead man's paperwork. "Does anyone else know about this?" she said. "Dale Pruitt knows the water rights are complicated. He doesn't know the details." He paused. "You're the first person I've shown that document to." She wasn't sure what to do with that. "Why?" she asked. He took the document back, folded it along its worn lines. "Because I think you're going to need to understand the whole picture before you walk into whatever you're about to walk into with Damien." "And you trust me with it?" He considered her for a moment, not performing the consideration, just actually doing it, looking at her with the same directness he'd been looking at her with from the beginning. "I trust that you've made a decision about what matters here," he said. "Whether that trust is earned or just convenient, I'll find out." It was not the most comfortable thing anyone had ever said to her, but it was honest, and she had stopped pretending that honest wasn't what she needed. Outside, Lily had finished cooling the mare and was leading her back to the barn, talking to her the whole way. A continuous, quiet conversation that carried just enough to be heard, but not enough to be made out. The evening light had turned the paddock fence gold. The springs somewhere beyond the south pasture were doing what they'd always done. "I should go," Victoria said. "I need to call Patrick." Jackson walked her to the door. She stopped on the porch and turned back, and he was standing in the doorway in the last of the light. And for a second neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of conversation. "Jackson." She looked at him. "I'm sorry. For showing up here with those photographs and those numbers and treating this like a project." He leaned against the doorframe. "You came here with a job to do." "That's not the same as an apology." He looked at her for a moment, Something moved through his expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "Go make your call," he said. She walked to the Land Rover. She was halfway there when she heard Lily's voice from the direction of the barn. "Miss Victoria." She turned. Lily was standing at the barn door in her riding clothes, horse brush still in hand, hair everywhere. "Are you going to fix it?" Lily asked. The simplicity of the question hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. The kid was looking at her with the same direct, unsentimental clarity she looked at puzzle pieces with, trying to figure out if this piece went where it seemed to go. "Yeah," Victoria said. "I'm going to fix it." Lily nodded once, apparently satisfied, and disappeared back into the barn. Victoria got in the car. She sat there for a second with her hands on the wheel and the engine off, and she felt something shift inside her that had been building for 3 weeks. A slow cracking of something she'd built very deliberately and maintained very carefully and had never, until she drove into Harlan County, had a real reason to question. She started the engine. She pulled out onto the county road heading back toward town, toward Patrick's call, toward the entire unraveling thing she was going to have to handle, but she drove a little slower than usual. Patrick's call came in at 11:14 that night. Victoria was still at the kitchen table of the rental house, the overhead light too bright and a half-eaten sandwich beside her laptop, when her phone lit up. She picked it up before the second ring. "Tell me," she said. 31 months, Patrick said. He sounded like a man who had spent the last 6 hours confirming something he hadn't wanted to confirm. Going back 31 months across 4 separate project accounts. The total, across all of them, is just under $2.3 million. She put the sandwich down. 2.3. Payments to 7 different entities. Aqua Meridian is the largest. The other 6 are structured similarly. Delaware and Nevada LLCs, registered agents, no public footprint. I cross-referenced the registration dates. He paused. 3 of them were registered within a month of Damien joining Sinclair Capital. The overhead light buzzed faintly. She hadn't noticed it before. "He came in with the structure already built," she said. "That's what it looks like." Patrick's voice was careful and tired. "Victoria, if this goes public, I know what it means. The company's exposure is—" "Patrick," she stopped him. "I know. Write everything up. Secure copies, personal storage, nothing on the company server, and I need you to get me the contact for Marcus Dreisman." Dreisman was a white-collar criminal attorney in Houston. She'd met once at a conference and had hoped never to need. "Get me a call with him tomorrow morning, early." "Okay." A pause. "Are you all right?" There it was again. The same question Jackson had asked her, in almost the same words. She was apparently giving off some signal she wasn't aware of. "I'm fine," she said. "Get some sleep." She hung up and sat there with the laptop screen and the too bright light and the cold sandwich, and she thought about Damien Cole. She thought about the first time she'd met him, a rooftop reception in Austin 3 years ago, late spring. The city laid out below them, and the air warm and easy. He'd been smart and funny, and he'd known things about real estate development that she hadn't known yet, which was rare because there weren't many people who knew things she didn't know yet. She'd hired him 6 weeks later. She'd given him increasing responsibility because he'd consistently earned it. She'd trusted him because he'd consistently done the work that trust required. Except he hadn't been doing that work at all. He'd been doing his own work, parallel and invisible, and she'd funded it. The anger came slowly, the way real anger did. Not hot and immediate, but cold and building, settling into her chest and staying there. She was angry at Damien, obviously. But there was a specific, sharper anger underneath that one, directed inward, at the version of herself who had built a company on the principle of moving fast and trusting competence, and never slowing down long enough to ask what the people around her were actually doing with the access she gave them. She closed the laptop, washed the plate she hadn't used, went to bed and lay in the dark, adding things up. Damien came back from Austin on Friday afternoon. She knew because he texted her from the road, a habit he had, keeping her informed of his movements in a way that had always read as professional conscientiousness and now read as something else entirely. She typed back a single thumbs up and put her phone face down on the table. She'd spent Thursday with Marcus Dreisman on the phone for 2 hours in the morning and another hour in the afternoon. He had the specific calm of an attorney who had seen most things and found almost none of them surprising, which was both reassuring and slightly chilling. He'd walked her through the exposure, the reporting obligations, the sequence of steps that would give her the strongest legal and reputational position. He'd asked precise questions, and she'd answered all of them. "You need more documentation before you confront him," Dreisman had told her. "Ideally, something that connects his name directly to one of the LLCs. Not just payments, beneficial ownership, something that shows he's not just a middleman." She'd asked how long that would take. He'd said it depended on whether she had a cooperative forensic accountant and access to the company's internal systems before Damien noticed anything was wrong. She did have a forensic accountant, a woman named Carol Besh in Dallas, who owed her a professional favor and who answered her call Thursday evening with the brisk efficiency of someone who cleared her schedule without being asked. She had until Damien got back, which was approximately now. She'd arranged to meet him at the project office Sinclair Capital had taken in Harlan, a rented suite in a small professional building on Main Street. Not much. 2 rooms and a conference table. She got there at 4, which was 30 minutes before he was supposed to arrive. She went through the shared drive, the project server, the paper files in the cabinet by the window. She took photographs of everything she didn't already have copies of and sent them to Carol Besh's encrypted account. At 4:30, she heard his car in the parking lot. She was sitting at the conference table with a notepad and a coffee when he came in, and she made herself be completely normal about it. The greeting, the how was the drive, the brief rundown of what had happened while he was gone. She watched him the whole time, not obviously, just with the full attention she usually gave to contract negotiations, looking for seams. There were seams. There had always been seams, she understood now. She just hadn't been looking. He was relaxed. That was the thing. He was completely relaxed, moving through the room with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had everything where he wanted it. He poured himself coffee from the maker on the counter and talked about the Austin regulatory meeting, what had been accomplished, what still needed follow-up. He was good at the narrative of competence. He'd always been good at it. "How's the Reed situation?" he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Still stalled," she said. "He's not moving." "I was thinking about that on the drive back." He turned his coffee mug. "I've been in touch with a colleague in Austin who works in water law. There might be a public interest argument worth exploring." She looked at him. "What kind of argument?" "The aquifer under this valley supports agriculture for about 30,000 acres of land. There's a case to be made that consolidating water management under a single professional entity would actually protect the resource better than the current patchwork of individual rights. If we can frame an application to the Texas Water Development Board, Damien," she kept her voice completely even, "that's a condemnation strategy dressed up as conservation. I'm not going to do that." He paused. He looked at her with the brief, recalibrating look she now recognized as a tell, the micro-adjustment of a person who'd made a wrong assumption and was smoothing over it. "I'm just exploring options," he said. "I know." She smiled. It felt like wearing a coat that didn't fit. "Let's hold on that for now. I want to focus on the residential partnership agreements. Can you get me the current status on all the neighboring property negotiations?" He said he would. They talked for another 40 minutes. She listened to everything he said and filed it. When he left at 6, she sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes, staring at the wall, then called Carol Besh. "How soon do you need it?" Carol said. "Monday," Victoria said. A pause. "That's tight." "I know. I'm sorry. Buy me dinner when this is over." "I'll buy you dinner anywhere you want." She went to the ranch on Saturday morning without calling first. She drove out at 8, and Jackson was at the fence again. Not the same section, a different stretch of the north line this time. He looked up when he heard the car and didn't seem surprised. She got out and walked over. He had a post-hole digger and a bag of cement mix and the practiced frustration of a man dealing with ground that was harder than it looked. "You could have called," he said. "I know. I needed to drive." He accepted that without comment, which she'd noticed was one of his habits. The willingness to accept explanations that were honest, even if they weren't fully formed. "I talked to Damien yesterday," she said. "How was it?" "Awful in a very ordinary way. He was completely normal. Told me about Austin, asked about you, floated the public interest water argument like it was just a thought he'd had. What did you do? Nothing. I smiled and took notes and asked him to send me status reports. She watched him position a post. I hate it, the performance of it. That's because it's not something you're built for, he said, and it wasn't a compliment or a criticism, just an observation. She thought about that. My attorney says I need beneficial ownership documentation before I can move. Something that ties Damien's name directly to one of the LLCs. I've got an accountant working on it. How long? She said Monday. I told her I needed Monday. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, working the post into the hole, checking the level with a tool he pulled from his back pocket. There's something else, she said. He waited. I called the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division yesterday afternoon, anonymously through a lawyer. I wanted to know what the reporting obligation was for a company that discovers internal fraud that's affected third parties. She paused. They said the obligation isn't automatic, but they said if the fraud involves forged instruments on real property filings, that creates a separate criminal exposure that doesn't wait on the company's timeline. Jackson straightened up, looked at her directly. What I'm saying, she continued, is that once Carol has the documentation, it doesn't just become something I can take to my board. It becomes something I have to report. And the moment I report it, everything moves on a timeline I don't control. I understand that. I want you to understand it clearly because the Hendersons, Dale, the Navarro family, they're going to be involved. There will be investigators talking to them. It's going to be disruptive and long, and they're going to be dragged into something they didn't ask for. They're already in it, he said. They've just been in it without knowing. He picked up the cement bag. Tell them yourself. Don't let them hear it from a stranger. She blinked. What? The Hendersons, Dale, the Navarros. He looked at her. Go see them. Tell them what you found. Tell them what's coming. Give them the chance to understand it before it lands on them. He poured cement into the hole. They deserve that from you directly, not from a letter. She stood there for a moment. It was a simple thing, and it was obviously right, and she hadn't thought of it because she'd been thinking operationally. Evidence, attorneys, timelines, and he'd gone straight to the human element without even pausing. Okay, she said. I'll do that today. Dale will be home this afternoon. Henderson's too. She nodded. She looked out at the pasture beyond the fence line, at the flat, honest sky, at the way the land just went on and on without asking permission. After a moment, she said, Does it ever feel like too much, carrying all of this by yourself? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Sometimes, he said, Lily helps. A kid helps you carry it? He looked at her with a slight expression she'd learned to read as the version of him that was almost amused. She puts everything in scale. You ever have a problem that seems enormous, and then someone asks you if the baby colt has a name yet, and somehow the enormous thing is still there, but it's more the right size? Victoria thought about Lily asking if she was going to fix it, with the same tone she used to identify puzzle pieces. Just a clear question expecting a clear answer. Yeah, she said. I think I'm starting to understand that. He went back to the fence. She stood there a moment longer, then said she'd see him Monday, and walked back to the car. She spent all of Saturday visiting neighbors. Dale Pruitt's kitchen was warm and slightly cluttered, and he listened to everything she said while his wife made sandwiches in the background without comment, and when Victoria finished, he was quiet for a full 10 seconds. How bad is the forged document situation, he said. One confirmed, potentially more. My accountant is building the ownership chain now. Is Jackson okay? She looked at him. The question had oriented itself around Jackson first, without preamble, the way concerns organized themselves in a community where people knew each other for decades. He's fine. He's been more ahead of this than anyone. Dale nodded slowly. That sounds right. He glanced at his wife. We're not selling anything. Just so you understand, that's not changing regardless of what happens. I know that. I'm not asking you to. What do you need from us? She told him what she might need, possibly a statement about the unsolicited approach regarding the water lease, possibly cooperation with investigators. He said yes to both without deliberation. The Hendersons were harder. Carl sat across from her at the same kitchen table, and when she told him his signature had likely been forged on a county water rights application, The silence that followed was the particular silence of an old man who had given his life to a piece of land and was now being told that someone had tried to use his name to take it from him without his knowledge. Ruth set down the dish towel she'd been holding. "He forged Carl's name," Ruth said. "Not a question. We believe so. We're verifying. On a legal document." "Yes." Ruth looked at Carl. Carl looked at the table. His jaw moved slightly, the way jaws moved when people were working very hard at keeping something contained. "What do you need from us to make this right?" Carl said. "The original deed from 1978, the one with the land purchase from the Reed family. I need a copy to compare with the signature on the forged application." Carl got up without a word and went to a room in the back of the house. He came back with a fireproof document box and set it on the table. He went through it with the methodical patience of a man who filed things carefully and knew exactly where everything was. He found the document and handed it to Victoria. She looked at the signature. She looked at the photograph she had of the forged application on her phone. She didn't need a handwriting expert to see it. The signature on the application looked like someone had copied it from the deed. Same general shape, same letter formation, but slightly too careful. The kind of forgery that worked on a bureaucratic filing because no one was looking closely, but wouldn't survive any real scrutiny. "I'll make a copy and return the original," she said. Carl nodded. He put the document box back. When he came back to the kitchen, he looked older than he had an hour ago, which was not something Victoria had done on purpose, but was a consequence of what she'd come to say. "I'm sorry," she told him, "for this project arriving in your valley and bringing this with it." Carl looked at her. His expression was not warm exactly, but it was honest. "You didn't know what he was doing." "I should have known." "Maybe." He sat down. "But you found it. And you're here telling me yourself." He picked up his coffee. "That counts for something." Wosham. By Sunday evening, Carol Besh had what she needed. The document she sent to Victoria's encrypted account at 7:30 Sunday night was 14 pages, annotated and referenced, and it established with the clarity of a forensic accountant who did not use language loosely that Damian Cole was the beneficial owner of 4 of the 7 LLCs involved in the payments. The ownership trail ran through 2 layers of nominee entities, but Carol had found the registration signatures, the bank account authorizations, and in 2 cases the actual electronic trail of Damian's personal IP address connected to filing submissions. Victoria read the document twice. Then she called Dreisman. "This is enough," he said. "This is more than enough. You need to report this tomorrow, Victoria, before he has any chance to move money or destroy documents." "I know. The shareholders' meeting is Wednesday." She'd almost forgotten the meeting. Sinclair Capital's quarterly shareholders' meeting, scheduled 6 weeks ago. 32 investors gathered in a conference room in Dallas. Damian was on the agenda to present the Harlan project status. "What do I do about the meeting?" she said. Dreisman was quiet for a moment. "That depends on what you want the outcome to be. You could report to the AG's office tomorrow, let them handle it, keep the meeting quiet. Or," he paused again, "or you could let the meeting happen and handle it there, in front of the shareholders. It would be harder for him to run, and it would be harder for anyone to claim later that you tried to manage the exposure quietly." His voice was careful. "It would also be the end of your reputation in certain circles, possibly the beginning of it in others." She thought about the $2.3 million moving through accounts she'd signed. She thought about Carl Henderson's face when she told him his name had been forged. She thought about Dale Pruitt asking if Jackson was okay, the way communities anchored themselves around people who held things together. "I'll call you in the morning," she said. She called Jackson instead. It was 9:15. He picked up after 2 rings and she could hear the television quietly in the background. Something low and indistinct, the sound of a house winding down for the night. "She send the document?" he said. He'd known she was waiting for it. "Yes, it's enough." "Good." She exhaled. "The shareholders' meeting is Wednesday. My attorney says I have 2 options. File with the AG tomorrow and let the legal process run. Or do it at the meeting." "Yes." He was quiet. "Jackson, if I do it at the meeting, it's public, immediately public. Every investor in that room has contacts. It goes wide before the day is out. The legal and financial fallout. She stopped. It would probably end the company. Would it end you? The question landed differently than she expected. Not would it ruin you or would you survive it, but the more specific, more essential version. No, she said slowly. I don't think it would. Then you know what to do. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window of the rental house, the main street of Harlan, was quiet. A stoplight changed through its colors for nobody. I keep thinking, she said, about how I built this company. 10 years. Starting with nothing, building it into something real. And now I'm sitting here figuring out how to dismantle it. You're not dismantling it, he said. You're deciding what it actually stands for. That sounds like something on a motivational poster. I know. It's still true. She laughed, a real one, short and slightly surprised, the kind of laugh that comes out of exhaustion rather than humor. She heard something in his end of the line shift, a quality of attention that changed without any sound. You scared? He said. Yes. Good. Not unkindly. Means you understand what's at stake. She pulled her knees up on the rental house couch, which was not designed for sitting like that, and didn't care. How's Lily? Asleep. She named the colt today. What did she name it? Atlas. A pause. She said it's because he looks like he's carrying something heavy, but he doesn't mind. Victoria looked at the ceiling. That's an 8-year-old's name? She reads a lot. Does she know what Atlas is from? She gave me a 10-minute explanation of Greek mythology and then asked me what I thought the colt looked like, and I said I thought he looked like a Bob, and she told me a horse named Bob deserved better. He paused. She has strong opinions about naming things. She does. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then, Jackson. After Wednesday. After all of this. She wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. We'll figure out what's next after Wednesday, he said. Not a promise, not a deflection, just a statement about sequence. One thing at a time. She nodded even though he couldn't see it. Okay. Get some sleep. I'll try. She paused. Thank you for... She stopped again because she didn't quite have the right words for what she was thanking him for. Not help, exactly. Not advice. Something more like the experience of being around someone who was so clearly himself that it made her feel the places where she'd stopped being herself without noticing. Go to sleep, Victoria, he said. She did, eventually, better than she had since she arrived in Harlan County. Monday morning, she filed a formal report with the Texas Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Dreisman was on the call with her, and the investigator on the other end was a woman named Ferris, who had the brisk, specific energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of call. She had questions. Victoria answered all of them. By Monday afternoon, a preservation order had been filed on the 3 LLC accounts with the most activity, which meant Damien could not move money out of them. Victoria didn't know if he'd noticed yet. She didn't call him. She went about the rest of Monday with the specific, focused calm of someone who has made a decision and is now just executing it, which was honestly the mental state she was most comfortable in. Tuesday, she drove out to see Jackson one more time. Lily was at school. The ranch was quiet in the middle of the day, the specific midday quiet of a working property, everything doing what it was supposed to be doing without anyone managing it. She found Jackson on the back porch, going through a stack of papers that turned out to be the trust documents. He'd organized them, not dramatically. He'd just gone through them and put them in the right order with a straightforward cover sheet he'd typed up on an old printer in the corner of the office. "What's this?" she said, sitting across from him. "If the investigation goes the way it should, they're going to subpoena property records and water rights documentation." He slid the stack toward her. "I want the trust documents in order before that happens. I want it to be clean when someone looks at it." She went through them. He'd done it properly. Everything chronological, referenced correctly, the trust instrument first and the subsequent amendments behind it in sequence. It was the work of someone who understood that clarity was a form of protection. "Your grandfather was smart," she said. "He was careful." Jackson leaned back. "There's a difference. Smart people come up with ideas. Careful people make sure the ideas actually work when something goes wrong." She looked at the trust instrument, the 1987 filing date, the signatures of witnesses she didn't know, county officials, neighbors, a lawyer whose name she didn't recognize. All those people, all those years ago, doing the unglamorous work of making something solid, making something that could hold. "I've been thinking about the company," she said. "What comes after?" Dreisman thinks the board will vote to dissolve or restructure depending on how the liability shakes out. What do you think? I think they're probably right. The company as it exists now is built on processes that Damien compromised. Even if most of it is clean, the trust is gone. She folded her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about what I'd build instead." He waited. "Something smaller, more direct. No partners with their own agendas, no projects I'm not personally inside of." She paused. "Something focused on land, not acquiring it, working with the people who already have it." He looked at her with the particular attention she'd gotten used to, the kind that didn't perform interest but just had it. "That's a different business," he said. "I know. Are you good at different?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm better at starting things than most people. Whether I'm good at starting things that are actually different from what I've done before?" She shrugged. "I don't know yet." He looked out at the south pasture. The afternoon light had gotten low and wide, the kind of Texas light that made everything look like it was being preserved in it. "You'll figure it out," he said. And it wasn't a compliment. It was just a statement of what he thought was true, which was somehow more useful. From somewhere distant, the direction of the springs, came the faint sound of running water. She heard it this time. She was sure she hadn't been able to hear it before from this porch. Maybe she hadn't been listening right. "Is that the springs?" she said. "Yes." "I've never heard them from here." "You have to be quiet enough." He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was still looking at the pasture. "Most people aren't when they first get here." She sat with that. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Tomorrow she was going to walk into a conference room full of investors and do the hardest thing she'd done in her professional life, and it was going to go badly and then, eventually, better. She understood that about Wednesday. She understood it with the clarity of someone who had stopped pretending that difficult things were anything other than what they were. But right now it was Tuesday afternoon on a ranch in Harlan County, and the springs were running, and she could hear them for the first time, and that felt like something worth noting before everything else happened. She drove to Dallas on Wednesday morning in the dark. She left Harlan at 4:15, which put her on the highway before the sun came up, and she drove with the radio off and the windows slightly cracked, and the flat Texas landscape moving past her in the dark, like something being slowly revealed. She'd packed a bag the night before with the mechanical efficiency of someone who was trying not to think too hard about the morning. The right clothes, the documents, Carol's 14-page report printed twice and sealed in a manila envelope she'd put in her bag before she could second-guess it. She'd texted Jackson at 4 when she got in the car, just, "Heading out now." His reply came back in under 2 minutes, which meant he was already awake. "Drive safe, call after." She'd looked at those 2 lines for a moment before putting the phone down on the passenger seat. 3 words each. Not a speech, not reassurance dressed up in language. Just the plain acknowledgement that she was doing something and he'd be there when it was done. She drove. The meeting was at 10 in a building in downtown Dallas she'd been in a dozen times. Sinclair Capital had used its third-floor conference room for investor presentations since the company's second year. She knew the room. She knew the view from the east windows, the specific rattle of the HVAC when it kicked on, the way the morning light hit the long table at a low angle that always made everyone look slightly older. She knew all 32 investors in that room by name and by history, knew who asked hard questions and who deferred, knew who she'd need to hold steady and who would panic first. She arrived at 9:15. Patrick was already there, standing outside the elevator bank with 2 coffees, his face doing the thing it did when he was working hard at being calm. "Carol sent the final version last night," he said, handing her one of the coffees. "I printed extra copies." "I have them." She looked at him. He looked back. He'd been with her for 6 years, and she'd put him in a difficult position, and he'd handled it without complaint, and she owed him more than she could currently figure out how to express. "Patrick, whatever happens this morning, you did the right thing." "So did you." he said. Eventually. It landed with the slight sting of an honest thing said by someone who had earned the right to say it. She nodded once. Is Damien here? Not yet. He texted me 20 minutes ago, said he's 5 minutes out. Okay. She adjusted the strap of her bag. Let's go up. The investors filtered in between 9:30 and 9:50. She stood near the windows and greeted each of them the way she always had, direct, unhurried, with the specificity that people appreciated when they had money involved. She asked about families and projects and things she'd filed in her memory over the years of working relationships. The room warmed up with the ordinary noise of people settling in, the shuffle of papers and coffee cups and phones turned face down on the table. Damien arrived at 9:52. He came in the way he always did, fluid, unhurried, the easy confidence she'd always read as competence. He had his laptop bag over one shoulder and a to-go cup in his hand, and he smiled at the room with the relaxed authority of someone who believed the day was going to go exactly as planned. He found her eyes across the table and gave her a nod. She gave one back. She watched him set up at his end of the table. She watched him pull out his laptop and open his presentation and exchange brief pleasantries with the investors on either side of him. He was good. She'd always known he was good. Understanding that the goodness had been in service of something else entirely didn't make it less technically impressive. She called the meeting to order at 10 o'clock. The first 40 minutes were standard. Financial overview, portfolio updates, the quarterly summary that Patrick presented with his usual precision. She listened from the head of the table, watching the room, watching Damien most of all. He was engaged and attentive, and he asked one question during the financial review that was smart and relevant, and she thought, he has no idea. He genuinely does not know that the order is already in place on the LLC accounts. He doesn't know about Carol's report, or Dreisman, or the Monday morning call with the AG's office. He believed he was sitting in a regular meeting on a regular Wednesday, about to present a project that was, from his perspective, coming along perfectly. She called on him at 10:42. He stood. He pulled up the first slide, an aerial overview of Harlan County, the same kind of photograph she'd once brought to Jackson's kitchen table. He began talking through the project status with the fluency of someone who had given this particular presentation in his head many times. She let him go for 4 minutes. Then she said, "Damien, stop." He stopped. He looked at her. The room went quiet in the way rooms went quiet when something shifted that nobody had been told about. "Sit down," she said. He sat. His expression was controlled, a professional's version of surprised, calibrated to look appropriate without revealing anything. She'd seen that expression on his face before and read it as composure. Now she understood it differently. She stood. She opened her bag and pulled out the manila envelope and set it on the table in front of her. She looked around the room at the 32 investors and Patrick and the 2 junior associates who were in the room for note-taking purposes and were now completely motionless. "I need to walk you through something," she said, "and I'm going to ask that everyone in this room hear it completely before they respond. That includes you, Damien." She started with Aqua Meridian Holdings. She explained the payments. She explained the LLC structure. She explained the timeline, 31 months, 4 project accounts, $2.3 million. She explained what Carol had found, the beneficial ownership trail, the registration signatures, the IP addresses. She put Carol's summary pages on the table in front of each investor, and she walked them through it page by page with the specific, deliberate clarity of someone who had been preparing this explanation for 3 days and was not going to rush it. The room was completely silent. She explained the forged Henderson signature. She explained the Aqua Meridian filing for Henderson's property. She explained the broader structure, so what she believed Damien had been building, the parallel operation, the international water rights sale that had been the endpoint of all of it. Halfway through, she heard the change in Damien's breathing. She didn't look at him. She kept looking at the investors. She finished. She set the last document on the table. She said, "As of Monday morning, I filed a formal report with the Texas AG's office. The accounts are under a preservation order. This isn't something I'm bringing to this room to manage internally. I'm bringing it to you because you have a right to know the state of the company you've invested in before it appears in a press release." The silence held for about 4 more seconds. Then one of the investors, a woman named Diane Marsh, who had been with Sinclair Capital since year one and who had always been the first person to ask the question everyone else was thinking, said very quietly, "Victoria, how long did you know?" 3 weeks for the early signals, full documentation as of Sunday night. 3 weeks. I moved as fast as I could move without giving him time to destroy evidence or transfer funds. She met Diane's eyes. I understand that's not a satisfying answer. Diane looked at the document in front of her. She didn't say anything else. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Then Damien said, "This is," and stopped. Victoria looked at him for the first time since she'd told him to sit down. He looked the way people looked when a structure they'd built very carefully collapsed without warning. Not destroyed exactly, but suddenly exposed. The composure was still there in the surface layer, but something underneath it had shifted, and what was underneath was not what she'd expected. She'd expected calculation. She'd expected him already working an angle. What she saw instead was something more human and more unsettling. A man who had made a very long series of choices and was now in the first moment of truly understanding where they'd brought him. "Don't," she said. Not loudly, just directly. He closed his mouth. "You'll have the opportunity to respond to investigators," she said. "That's the appropriate venue, not this one." He looked at the table. He didn't say anything else. Chat City. The meeting ended at 12:30. There was no clean ending to it. Meetings like that didn't have clean endings. There were conversations and questions and one investor who got loud for about 10 minutes before Diane Marsh told him firmly to sit down, which he did. Patrick answered the financial questions he could answer and deferred the ones he couldn't. Damien sat through the remainder of the meeting in a silence that was complete and strange, and when it was over, he stood and picked up his bag and walked out without speaking to anyone. And that was the last Victoria saw of him that day. She stayed for another 45 minutes, talking individually to the investors who needed it, answering what she could, acknowledging what she couldn't. Some of them were angry. Some were measured. Diane Marsh shook her hand at the end and said, "You didn't have to do it this way. You could have handled it quietly." "I know. Why didn't you?" Victoria thought about the Henderson kitchen table and Carl's face and the fireproof document box. She thought about Dale Pruitt asking if Jackson was all right. She thought about a trust filing from 1987 and the patience of someone building something careful enough to last. Because quiet would have protected the company and not the people the company affected, she said. Diane studied her for a moment. "That's going to cost you." "Probably." "Is it worth it?" Victoria picked up her bag. "I'll let you know when I'm on the other side of it." Mom. She called Jackson from the parking garage at 1:45. She sat in the driver's seat of the Land Rover with her bag in the passenger seat and the engine not yet on and the concrete silence of the garage around her. He picked up on the second ring. "How did it go?" She told him. All of it. Damien's face, Diane's question, the investor who'd gotten loud, the way the room had felt in the 40 seconds after she finished laying it out and before anyone spoke. She told it plainly, without inflation, and he listened the whole way through without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You okay?" "Tired. A little," she searched for the word. "Hollow, like after you've been carrying something for a long time and you put it down and your arms don't know what to do." "That's how it feels when something's over," he said. "Is it over?" "The hard part of it." A pause. "The legal piece will take a while, but the thing you were afraid to do, that part's done." She leaned her head back against the headrest. "The company might not survive the restructuring. You said that might happen. Saying it and watching it start to happen are different." "Yeah." He didn't offer comfort that wasn't available. She appreciated that more than she could say. "You coming back tonight?" The question was simple, and it landed with a weight she hadn't expected. Coming back. As if Harlan County was where she was from rather than where she'd been assigned. "Yes," she said. "Tomorrow morning at the latest. I need to meet with Dreisman this afternoon. Lily asked about you at breakfast." "What did she ask?" "She asked if you were going to be okay today. I told her yes." Victoria looked at the concrete wall of the parking garage. It was an ugly, honest wall. stained with exhaust and marked with the scuffs of 1,000 car doors. "How did you know to tell her yes?" "Because I know you," he said. And he said it simply, the way he said most things, not dressed up, not performed, just the plain declaration of something he'd arrived at through observation. She sat with that for a long moment. In the garage's quiet, she could hear her own breathing. "I'll call you after Dreisman," she said. "I'll be here." Marcus Dreisman's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Uptown, and he met her in the conference room rather than his office, which was a courtesy she recognized as one. He had coffee waiting, and he let her drink half of it before he started talking. He told her that the AG's office had contacted Damien's attorney that morning. News traveled fast in legal circles when preservation orders were involved. He told her that 2 of the 7 LLCs had already been traced to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He told her that the international buyer Damien had been in negotiations with, the corporation he'd intended to sell the consolidated water rights to, was a holding company connected to a European infrastructure fund that had been under separate SEC scrutiny for 18 months. "He wasn't small-time about it," Dreisman said. "No," she said. "He wasn't. The forged Henderson document is the cleanest criminal exposure. Forgery of a recorded real property instrument is a second-degree felony in Texas. Everything else is civil and federal, which takes longer, but the forgery will move quickly. What about the other ranchers, the ones who got the unsolicited approaches about water leases? If no agreements were actually signed, there's no direct victim status for them in the criminal case, but the investigators will want their testimony about the approaches." He looked at her over his glasses. "They should each have their own counsel, just to protect their interests through the process." She nodded. "I'll make sure they know that." "Victoria," he set his pen down. "The report you filed Monday, that was the right call. I want you to know that clearly. From a legal standpoint, it substantially limits the company's exposure, and it puts you on the right side of the timeline. From every other standpoint," he paused. "I've been doing this for 23 years. Most people in your position try to manage the story first. You didn't. The story was going to come out either way. That's true. But most people don't believe it until it's too late." She thought about sitting at the rental house kitchen table at 11 at night, with a half-eaten sandwich and a too-bright light, adding up things she'd been wrong about. She thought about a dirt road and a fence line, and a man who told her to go see the neighbors herself instead of letting them hear it from a stranger. "I had some help thinking it through," she said. She got back to Harlan County at 9 that night. She hadn't planned to go to the ranch. It was late. Lily would be asleep. There was no practical reason. But when she turned off the highway, she found herself taking County Road 14 without making a decision about it, the way you drove roads you knew well, and she pulled into the gravel drive and the porch light was on. Jackson opened the door before she knocked. He was in worn jeans and a faded Henley, and he looked like a person who had been waiting without making a production of it, which was exactly what he'd been doing. "I said tomorrow at the latest," she said. "I know." She walked in. The house was quiet. Lily's shoes by the door, the faint mess of a normal evening cleared away, but not completely. A glass of water on the counter that had been there a while. She sat down at the kitchen table, which felt like sitting down at a place she knew, and he put coffee on without asking. "Dreisman says the forgery charge moves fastest," she said. "The rest is federal, which takes longer." "How long?" "Could be a year. Could be more." He sat down across from her. "The valley is protected in the meantime. The preservation order covers the LLC accounts. The forged application has been flagged with the county recorder. Linda's office put a challenge notation on it. And your trust documents." She looked at him. "Those were never at risk. But I want to make sure everyone understands they were never at risk." "I know." He folded his hands on the table. "Dale knows. Carl knows. I talked to them both today." "You called them." "Went out to see them. Figured they'd want to hear it face to face." He looked at her with a slight expression she'd come to know well, the almost wry version of him. "Seemed like the thing to do." She looked at him. "You did what I did on Saturday." "It's a good approach." She shook her head slowly. "I taught you that. I learned it from watching you do it." He got up when the coffee maker beeped and poured 2 mugs. He set hers in front of her. "Carl said to tell you thank you." She looked at the coffee. She wasn't sure she was going to be able to drink it. The day had been long and the coffee would keep her up, and she was already running on the specific kind of energy that came from sustained tension and would collapse the moment she stopped. But she wrapped her hands around the mug anyway because it was warm. "What happens to the resort project?" Jackson said. "It ends. The contract framework Damien built is compromised. Even the legitimate parts are entangled with the fraudulent structure. And honestly," she looked around the kitchen, at the refrigerator with Lily's drawing, at the cabinet of chipped mugs, at the ordinary, accumulated evidence of a life lived in one place with intent. "It wasn't the right project for this valley. It was the right project for someone else's idea of what this valley could be. And what do you think it could be?" She'd been thinking about that since Tuesday afternoon, since she'd said something focused on land and he'd asked if she was good at different, and she'd said honestly that she didn't know yet. "I think it could be exactly what it is," she said, which sounds simple, but doing it in a way that keeps it that way while the world keeps pushing against it, that takes work, real work, not resort brochure work. She turned the mug in her hands. "There's a model, land conservation investment, working with family owners on succession planning, sustainable operation, protection from the kind of pressure that Damien was trying to apply from the outside. It's less glamorous than what I've been doing." "Is glamour something you need?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I thought I did. I built the company I built because it was impressive, and I wanted to be impressive, which is—" She paused. "It's not a terrible reason to build something, it's just not a sufficient one." He looked at her across the table with the quiet, patient attention she'd been the recipient of many times now, and she'd stopped finding it uncomfortable. It was just how he looked at things, fully, without hurry. "You'd be good at it," he said. "The conservation work." "You don't know that." "You figured out what Damien was doing in 3 weeks. You went to see the neighbors yourself. You walked into a room of 30 investors and told them something that was going to cost you, because the alternative was protecting yourself at other people's expense." He picked up his coffee. "You'll be good at it." She didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't do anything. She just let it sit there. From upstairs there was the faint sound of movement, the small noises of a child shifting in sleep, the creak of the old house settling around it. The ranch at night was its own kind of quiet, different from the rental house, different from Dallas, different from anywhere else she'd been in the last decade. It was a quiet that had weight and history in it, the accumulated silence of a place that had been inhabited with care for a very long time. "I should let you sleep," she said. She didn't move. "You could stay," he said. "Guest room. Lily would be—" He paused. "She'd be annoying about it in the good way." Victoria looked at him. He looked back, and there was nothing managed about it. No performance, no calculation, just the plain offer of a person who had decided she was someone worth making an offer to. "Okay," she said. "I'll get towels." He stood. "The guest room has a window that sticks. You have to hit the frame twice on the left side." "Good to know." He went to get towels. She sat at the table for another moment with her coffee, listening to the house. Somewhere beyond the south pasture, inaudible from this distance, the springs ran in the dark the way they had every night for 100 years. She thought about Wednesday. She thought about the conference room and Diane Marsh and Damien's face. She thought about Dreisman saying most people try to manage the story first, and the specific quality of satisfaction she'd felt. Not triumphant, just clean at having done the harder thing. She thought about what came next, which was long and complicated and mostly unresolved, and she found that the unresolved quality of it didn't frighten her the way it would have 3 months ago. 3 months ago, unresolved meant failure. Now it just meant what it actually meant, that there was more work to do, and she was in a place where work could be done, with people who understood the difference between building something and merely acquiring it. Jackson came back with towels folded in that efficient, unpretentious way that people who had been managing households alone learned to fold things. Not neat for the sake of it, just practical. "The bathroom's across the hall," he said. "There's an extra toothbrush in the cabinet. Lily's doctor gives them out like candy." "Of course she does." Victoria stood, took the towels. "Jackson." "Yeah." She looked at him. In the low kitchen light, with the sounds of the house around them and the long day behind her and the uncertain days ahead, she said, I'm glad I came here. To Harlan County. All of it. Even the parts that were terrible. He considered that. Even the part where I told you no the first day? Especially that part. She paused. It was the first time anyone had told me no in a while and meant it with their whole chest. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the thing underneath a smile that was more genuine than the smile itself. Get some sleep, he said. I will. She went upstairs. She found the guest room back, spare and clean, a patchwork quilt on the bed that had clearly been made by someone's hands a long time ago, a window that, as advertised, stuck in its frame. She hit it twice on the left side. It opened. The night air came in carrying the smell of grass and distance and the particular dark scent of a Texas night in spring. She lay down with the window open and the quilt pulled up and the sounds of the ranch settling around her. For the first time in 3 weeks, she was asleep before she'd finished a thought. She woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of an argument about eggs. Not a real argument, more the particular kind of negotiation that happened between a stubborn child and a patient parent who had learned to let certain things play out. Victoria lay still for a moment in the guest room, listening to the voices rise and fall through the floor, making out the cadence without quite catching the words. Lily's voice had a specific music to it when she was pressing a point. It went up at the end of sentences even when they weren't questions. Like everything she said was self-evidently correct, and she was simply waiting for the world to catch up. She got up, hit the window frame twice on the left side to close it, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the patchwork quilt in the early light. She had a moment, the way you sometimes did in the space between sleep and full wakefulness, of seeing the last few months clearly and all at once. Not in sequence, but the way you saw a landscape from a height, everything present simultaneously. The first letter in the manila envelope nailed to the gate. The kitchen table and the chipped mugs and the folder of documents Jackson had slid toward her. The conference room and Damien's face, Carol's 14 pages, Dreisman's steady, unsurprised voice, Carl Henderson opening a fireproof box, Dale Pruitt asking if Jackson was okay. She thought about the woman who had driven out of Dallas toward Harlan County 7 weeks ago with aerial photographs and a plan that fit inside a folder. She recognized that woman but felt the distance from her, the way you felt distance from an earlier version of yourself after something had changed you without ceremony, without announcement, without any single dramatic moment you could point to and say, that's where it happened. It happened in accumulation. It happened in small, honest moments that added up to something she didn't have a clean word for yet. She got dressed and went downstairs. Lily was standing on the second rung of a kitchen stool at the counter, apparently supervising scrambled eggs with the intensity of an air traffic controller. Jackson was at the stove and had the expression of a man who was doing a thing the way he always did it and was not going to be redirected by a 9-year-old, 8-year-old, regardless of the volume of feedback being offered. They need more time, Lily said. They're done. They're not fluffy. They don't need to be fluffy. They need to be cooked. Fluffy and cooked are not mutually exclusive. Jackson looked at his daughter with the long-suffering patience of a man who had created someone significantly more argumentative than himself. Where did you learn mutually exclusive? School. Ms. Patterson used it about whether we could have recess and a test on the same day. Lily became aware of Victoria in the doorway and pivoted immediately. He takes the eggs off too early. They get watery. I'm going to stay out of the egg debate, Victoria said. Smart, Jackson said, handing her a coffee without ceremony. She took it and leaned against the counter and watched them. The ordinary friction of two people who lived together and knew each other's habits down to the molecular level. Lily got down from the stool and began setting the table with the uneven thoroughness of a child who'd been given a task and took it seriously, but hadn't quite internalized that forks went on the left. Jackson transferred eggs to plates. The morning light came through the window over the sink at a low angle and made everything look slightly golden in that ordinary way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with a west-facing kitchen at 8 in the morning. It was such a regular thing. That was what kept hitting her, not the beauty of it. She'd been in beautiful places. The regularity. The sense that this was a Tuesday morning that looked like every other Tuesday morning, in a house where Tuesday mornings had a texture and a pattern, and a particular quality of argument about eggs. She had lived for 10 years in a life so deliberately exceptional. The deals, the growth, the constant acceleration, that ordinary had come to feel like something to move past rather than something to inhabit. She sat down at the table. Lily put a fork in front of her on the right side, and Victoria moved it without comment. "You moved my fork," Lily said. "It was on the wrong side." Lily looked at it. She sat down and picked up her fork and appeared to file the information away as if she might use it later. "Are you staying today?" Lily asked her. Victoria glanced at Jackson. He was sitting down with his own plate, not looking at her, the specific not looking of a person who was deliberately giving her room to answer. "For a while," Victoria said. "I have some calls to make this morning." "Okay." Lily ate a bite of eggs and turned to her father. "They're watery." "They're perfect," Jackson said. The calls came in clusters throughout the morning, the way they always did in the aftermath of something that had moved fast and messily through the world. Driesman first, updating her on the AG's timeline. The forgery charge was moving to a grand jury presentation within 30 days, which Driesman said was fast, meaning Harlan County's DA's office had decided to make it a priority. Then Patrick, steady and methodical, walking through the restructuring conversations he'd been having with the board members who'd called him directly after the meeting because they hadn't been ready to talk to her yet. She sat on the back porch for those calls, the same porch where she and Jackson had sat on Tuesday afternoon, and she'd heard the springs for the first time. The morning had warmed quickly into one of those late spring Texas days that felt like the earth had made a decision, and the pasture beyond the fence line was brilliant in a way that had nothing to do with her state of mind and everything to do with light and grass and the particular moisture in the air after a good week. Patrick told her that 4 of the 32 investors had indicated they would be withdrawing their positions. He told her carefully that the remaining 28 were cautiously holding. He told her that Diane Marsh had called him the previous night to say that she intended to support whatever restructuring path Victoria chose, and that Diane had used the phrase "she did the right thing" in a tone that suggested she was not someone who used that phrase loosely. After the calls, she sat on the porch for a while without her phone. Jackson came out at some point and sat in the other chair, not asking how the calls had gone, just being present in that way he had. She appreciated it without feeling the need to say so. 4 investors are leaving, she said eventually. How many are staying? 28. That's more than half. That's most of them. She turned her coffee mug. I wasn't sure I'd get most of them. You were honest with them. People respond to that more than we give them credit for. He looked out at the pasture. Not all people, but most. She thought about that. The assumption most people operated under that honesty was a liability in business, that managing perception was the actual skill, that what mattered was the story you controlled rather than the truth you acknowledged. She'd operated under that assumption for years without quite knowing she did, because she'd been honest in her dealings. But she'd also always been managing, always shaping, always making sure the version of events that reached people was the version that served the larger goal. Wednesday had been different. Wednesday, she'd just stood up and said the thing clearly with no architecture around it, no managed version, no strategic framing. She'd put Carol's 14 pages on the table and let people see exactly what they were seeing. It had cost her 4 investors. It had probably saved her the other 28. She thought about what she'd said to Driesman. The story was going to come out either way. That was true. But the deeper truth was something she was still working out, that the life she wanted to live going forward was one where she didn't have to carry the gap between what was true and what she'd allowed people to believe. That gap had weight. She'd been carrying it without knowing. I want to talk to you about something, she said. Okay. The foundation idea, the one I mentioned, working with family-owned ranches, conservation investment, succession planning, protection from external acquisition pressure. She turned in her chair to face him more directly. I've been thinking about how to structure it, and I keep thinking that the model needs to be local, not something run from Dallas that comes out here with a plan, something that's actually rooted in a specific place and works outward from there. He was listening. Harlan County would be the right place to start, she said. The valley already has the architecture, the family ownerships, the water rights structure, the community relationships, What it needs is access to capital and legal infrastructure to protect what it already has. I could build that. I know how to build that. She paused. I'd need a partner who knows this land and these people and who the community actually trusts. Someone who can tell me when I'm wrong about things, which, she held his gaze, would probably be frequent at first. Jackson looked at her for a long moment. His expression wasn't readable in the easy way. It was the thoughtful, private kind of considering she'd seen him do before, the kind that had actual weight to it. What kind of partner? He said. An advisory role at minimum. More if you want it. A seat on the foundation board. Real authority, not decorative. She held still. I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking if you'd be willing to help me build something that serves the life you already have. He was quiet. You can say no, she said. I'll build it anyway. I'll just make more mistakes. Something moved through his face, that thing adjacent to a smile that she'd come to recognize as him finding something genuinely funny without performing it. You'd make fewer mistakes with help. That's a yes? That's a maybe working toward a yes. He turned back to the pasture. I'd want to understand the structure, the governance, who controls what, how decisions get made when we disagree. That's reasonable. I'd want Dale and Carl to have a voice in it, not just advisory, actual standing. Agreed. I was already thinking that. And it stays in the county, physical presence, not a satellite office. I was going to suggest the neighboring property, she said, the Carver land that's been empty for 2 years. There's a structure on it that could be converted. He looked at her. You already thought about the location. I think about logistics when I'm anxious. I thought about it on the drive back from Dallas last night. She said it without apology, because it was just true. This was who she was, the way she was built, the particular kind of mind that kept working on problems even when the problems were supposed to be resting. He didn't seem bothered by it. The Carver property would work, he said. So we're talking about a yes. We're talking about a yes, he said. And that was it. No ceremony, no handshake, just the plain acknowledgement of a decision reached by two people who had gotten to know each other well enough to make decisions without dressing them up. The legal aftermath moved the way legal things moved, slowly and then all at once in specific moments, with long stretches of administrative flatness in between. Damian Cole was formally indicted on the forgery charge 6 weeks after the shareholders' meeting. The federal fraud investigation, running in parallel, took longer but moved steadily. Once the LLC ownership documentation Carol had compiled was handed to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Houston. 2 of the 7 LLCs were directly connected to an international infrastructure fund under separate investigation, which expanded the federal case considerably and took it out of Harlan County's immediate sphere, which was both a relief and a frustration. Relief because it meant the community wasn't the epicenter. Frustration because it meant the timeline extended in ways Victoria couldn't control. The illegal property filings were voided by the county recorder's office within 3 weeks of the report. Linda, at the assessor's office, sent Victoria a formal notice of the void and attached a handwritten note to it that said simply, "Thank you for cleaning this up." Victoria kept the note. The Henderson forgery case moved fastest, as Dreisman had predicted. By the time summer arrived in Harlan County, Carl Henderson had given testimony to the DA's office, the grand jury had returned an indictment, and Damian's attorneys were in preliminary discussions about a plea agreement that would resolve the state charges in exchange for full cooperation on the federal investigation. Victoria learned most of this from Dreisman and from Patrick, and she delivered the updates to Dale Pruitt and the Hendersons herself, in person, in their kitchens, the way she'd learned to do things in this valley. She stopped arriving with folders. She started arriving with information that lived in her head, delivered plainly, and let people ask what they needed to ask. It was slower. It was better. Sinclair Capital restructured over the summer. 4 investors left, as Patrick had projected. 2 new investors came in after the story went public, not despite the Wednesday meeting, but because of it. One of them was a woman who ran a mid-sized endowment for a Texas land trust, and who called Victoria directly to say she'd been looking for someone with Victoria's specific skill set who was willing to operate with that specific level of transparency. And was there room for a conversation? There was. The conversation led to a partnership that reshaped what the restructured company was able to do. Diane Marsh stayed and eventually joined the advisory board of the foundation Victoria incorporated in September, the Reed Valley Land Foundation, named for the valley rather than for Jackson, though he was listed as the founding community partner and his name was on the board documents in the way names were on things that actually mattered, quietly, without announcement. The Carver property conversion took 4 months. It wasn't a renovation in the dramatic sense, more a careful adaptation, the kind that tried to use what was already there before adding what wasn't. The main structure, a low building that had been a livestock management facility, became the foundation's working space. There were offices and a meeting room that could hold 30 people, and a secondary space that Victoria had insisted be equipped for community use. A kitchen, long tables, space for the kind of gatherings that working ranching families actually needed but rarely had a neutral venue for. Jackson project managed the conversion with the same unhurried precision he brought to fence lines and water pumps. He had opinions about the structural work, which contractor to use, which walls to keep, what the building needed to function for people who worked with their hands and didn't care about design statements. Victoria had opinions about the operational infrastructure, the filing systems, the legal resource library, the financial modeling tools that would let small landowners understand their options without needing to hire consultants they couldn't afford. They disagreed about things regularly. He thought she over-engineered processes. She thought he under-documented decisions. Both of them were right about the other one, and they got better at saying so without it becoming a negotiation. Lily visited the construction site every weekend and had strong opinions about where the secondary building's windows should face. East, she said, on a Saturday in August, standing in the shell of the unfinished space with a juice box and the authority of someone who had given this considerable thought. "Why east?" Victoria asked. "Morning light. If people are going to work here, they should start their day with good light." She looked at Victoria. "That's what my teacher says. Good light makes people less grumpy." "Your teacher is right." "I know." Lily examined the unfinished wall. "Are you going to put books in here?" "Yes, a lot of them." "About what?" "Land law, water rights, agricultural financing, conservation easements." Victoria watched Lily's face. "Boring things." "Not boring if they help people keep their land." Lily said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who had been listening to adult conversations for long enough that the things adults discussed had stopped seeming abstract. She went back to her juice box and her examination of the wall. Victoria stood there and thought about what it meant that an 8-year-old could articulate the mission of a foundation in one plain sentence. Not boring if they help people keep their land. She was going to put that on the wall, she decided. Not in a motivational poster way, just carved or painted in the kind of unassuming lettering that didn't announce itself. She mentioned it to Jackson on the drive back to the ranch. He was quiet for a moment. "She'd be embarrassed if it was attributed to her," he said. "I know, that's why I wouldn't put her name on it." "She'd know anyway." "She'd know. She wouldn't mind." He glanced at her sideways. "How are you so sure about what she'd mind?" "Because I've been paying attention," Victoria said. "For several months now. I've been paying close attention." He looked back at the road. She could see him not smiling in the way she'd come to know well, and she felt the warmth of it, the way you felt a light that was pointed somewhere else. Not at you directly, but enough that you knew it was there. The foundation opened in October, on a Saturday that was warm and clear with the kind of fall light that Harlan County produced in quantity, low and honeyed and long. There was no ribbon cutting. Victoria had specifically decided against anything that felt like an announcement, because announcements attracted the kind of attention that put things in a frame they didn't need. And because the people this foundation was built for were not the kind of people who responded to fanfare. Instead, there was food on the long tables and a room full of neighbors and the Henderson family and Dale Pruitt and Linda from the assessor's office and a dozen other people from the valley who'd been brought in quietly over the summer through exactly the kind of personal conversation that Victoria had learned to have. Jackson gave a short speech that was mostly information. Here's what the foundation does, here's who it's for, here's how to contact us, delivered in the plain, steady voice of someone who had no particular relationship with performance and no need to develop one. Victoria spoke briefly and said only what was true, that she had come to Harlan County to build something that would have taken something away from this place, and that the people here had shown her, without lecturing her, what it actually meant to build something that belonged to where it stood. She didn't dress it up. She didn't make it more than it was. Carl Henderson shook her hand afterward and held it for an extra second without saying anything, which was its own kind of speech. Ruth Henderson hugged her, which was more. Lily ate 3 pieces of pie and fell asleep on a bench in the corner of the room with her head on a folded jacket, undisturbed by the adult conversation around her, in the specific boneless way of children who could sleep anywhere because the world still felt fundamentally safe enough to let down their guard in public. Victoria saw her there from across the room and stopped what she was doing for a moment. She'd thought about safety a lot in the past several months, not in the physical sense, but in the more elusive sense of the feeling of it. The sense of being in a place where the ground didn't shift under you, where the people around you were who they presented themselves as, where the work you did meant what it appeared to mean. She'd built a career in a world that ran on the opposite of that, on projections and managed presentations and the strategic construction of appearances. She'd been good at it. She'd been excellent at it. And excellence at something is seductive in a way that makes it hard to question whether the thing itself is worth being excellent at. She wasn't ready to say the last 10 years had been a mistake. The money she'd made and the company she'd built and the skills she'd developed had all arrived here with her and were part of what made the foundation possible. Nothing was wasted in that simple sense. But she understood now that she'd been operating in a room with the windows closed for a very long time, and she hadn't known the room was closed because she'd never been anywhere that had them open. Harlan County had open windows. That was the simplest way she knew to say it. She went and sat beside Lily's bench and finished her coffee and watched the room, the people talking and eating and doing the ordinary human work of being in community with each other, and felt the particular, difficult, unglamorous satisfaction of having done the right thing in a situation where the right thing had cost something real. In November, Damian Cole accepted a plea agreement. He pled guilty to 2 counts of forgery of a recorded instrument, 1 count of fraudulent filing of a real property document, and cooperated fully with the federal investigation into the International Infrastructure Fund. The cooperation produced significant evidence in the federal case and resulted in a reduced sentence recommendation: 4 years in federal custody, 3 of which he would likely serve. His attorneys released a statement that was careful and bloodless. He did not release one himself. Victoria read about it on her phone, sitting at the kitchen table of the ranch on a Tuesday morning. Jackson was across from her going through seed catalogs, which she'd learned was a November activity he took seriously. Lily was at school. She put the phone down. "Plea deal went through," she said. Jackson looked up. 4 years? Probably 3 served. She turned her phone face down on the table. He cooperated. That's what they wanted most. Jackson looked at her. "How do you feel about it?" She thought about it honestly. Like it's over and unresolved at the same time. Like the legal conclusion and the actual conclusion are 2 different things. She picked up her coffee. "I keep thinking about the version of him that first came to work for me. Who he was before all of this, or who I thought he was. I can't tell anymore if that was real and this was a deviation, or if this was always there and I just didn't see it." "Does it matter?" he said, not dismissively, genuinely asking. "I don't know. I think it matters for understanding how I missed it. You trusted him. He used that. That's his failure, not yours, even if it cost you something. It cost other people something." "Yeah." He didn't soften it. "It did, but you fixed what you could fix, and you did it in a way that didn't protect yourself at their expense." He turned a page of the catalog. "Most people don't do that." She sat with that. The morning was quiet around them. The particular Tuesday morning quiet of the ranch, the coffee steam, the sound of something in the yard outside, normal and unhurried. "I'm not going to keep second-guessing it," she said, more to herself than to him. "Good. I'm just going to do better at the structural level, the oversight, the verification." She looked at the table. "I was too comfortable with trust as a substitute for systems." "You can have both," he said. "I know. I'm building both." She paused. "The Foundation's governance documents are better than anything I've ever written for a company. Checks at every level. Nothing that can move without 2 sign-offs." I know, I read them. You read all 14 pages? You asked me to. I asked you to look them over. 14 pages is a lot of looking. I read fast. He found something in the catalog that apparently interested him and folded the corner of the page. You're a good writer. The mission language is clear. It was such a plain compliment, delivered so incidentally that she almost laughed. Thank you. Lily read the section about water conservation and asked if she could intern when she's old enough. She's 8. She's thinking ahead. He looked up. What did you say? I said obviously yes, but she'd need to do actual work and not just name things. He looked at her. She looked back, and somewhere in the space of that look was the entire accumulated weight of 7 months. The letter nailed to a gate, the coffee too strong, the aerial photographs of land reduced to geometry, the moment in a conference room in Dallas when 32 people went completely silent, the guest room with the stuck window, the back porch, and the sound of the springs at the right distance in the right quiet. She'd come here to take something. She was leaving, and by leaving, she didn't mean leaving, not anymore. She meant going forward, with something she couldn't have planned for, something that resisted the language of acquisition entirely because it wasn't hers in that way. It was just something she was part of, which was different, which was the whole point. On a Saturday in December, Lily asked them to walk down to the springs. It wasn't a request exactly. It was more the kind of announcement that children made when they'd decided something and were informing the relevant adults. She had her coat and her boots on before either of them had agreed to anything, which was its own form of negotiation. They walked the south pasture in the late afternoon, the three of them in a loose line with Lily slightly ahead the way she always was, moving faster than the situation required, turning back periodically to make sure the pace was being maintained. The winter grass was pale and dry underfoot, and the sky had the particular quality of a December sky in Texas, which was not cold in the way that photographs suggested, but was wide and flat and light in a way that pressed down gently on everything beneath it. The springs were lower in December than they were in spring, but they ran. They always ran. The creek that channeled from them moved over rocks worn smooth by decades of exactly this, water following the path it had always followed, patient and indifferent and continuous. Lily crouched at the edge and looked at the water with the focused attention she brought to puzzles. It's not as loud as summer, she said. Less volume in winter, Jackson said. Same source. She picked up a flat rock and turned it in her hand. Is the foundation going to protect this? That's part of what it does, Victoria said. The water rights thing, Grandpa Reed's trust thing. Yes. Victoria looked at Jackson. His grandfather's structure protects the water rights. The foundation adds a layer of protection around the community that depends on those rights. Lily set the rock down at the water's edge instead of throwing it. So it's like the trust protects the water, and the foundation protects the people, and the people protect each other. She said it with the simplicity of a child who hadn't yet learned that things were supposed to be more complicated than they were. Victoria felt something move through her chest, something without a clean name. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. Lily stood up. The water moved past her boots without touching them. The light had gotten lower, the sky shifting to the particular gold to amber transition that happened in the hour before a winter sunset in open country. Lily looked at both of them, and then she took Victoria's hand and Jackson's hand in that direct, uncalculated way of children who hadn't yet learned to treat affection as a transaction requiring setup and justification. Are you going to stay? She asked. She was looking at Victoria. There was no strategy in the question, no second layer. It was just the thing she wanted to know, asked in the vocabulary of someone who understood that the most important questions were simple ones. Victoria looked at Jackson. He looked back at her with that steady, open attention, not performing, not waiting for a correct answer, just being present in the way he was always present, which was more fully than most people she'd ever known. She thought about the woman who had driven out of Dallas 7 months ago with a folder and a plan and the unexamined confidence of someone who had always been able to acquire what she wanted if the price was right. She thought about what that woman had expected to find in Harlan County and what she'd found instead. A man who knew what his land was worth and said so without anger, a child who sorted puzzle pieces by color, A community of people who held each other through things without ceremony. A trust filing from 1987 that had outmaneuvered a $2 million fraud operation because someone, long ago, had been careful enough to build something that would last. She thought about what it meant to belong to a place. Not own it, not manage it. Belong to it. The way the springs belonged to the valley. The way the valley belonged to the people who had learned to tend it. The way Lily already knew she was part of something that would be here after her if she helped keep it. That was the thing she'd been building toward without knowing how to name it. Not a foundation, not a restructured company, not a legal victory or a professional reinvention. Just this. A life that was rooted somewhere. A place where the ground held. She squeezed Lily's hand. "Yeah," she said, "I'm going to stay." Lily nodded, satisfied in the way she nodded about correctly placed puzzle pieces. Not surprised, just confirmed. She let go of both their hands and moved a few feet away along the creek bank to examine something that had caught her eye, leaving Victoria and Jackson standing side by side in the last of the afternoon light. Jackson didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She'd noticed that about him from almost the beginning, the way silence was never empty with him, never a vacuum to be filled. It was just space, and he knew how to be in it without discomfort, and being around him had slowly taught her to do the same. They stood there while Lily crouched at the water's edge, narrating something about a rock to herself. And the light went amber and then began its slow fade, and the springs ran the way they had always run, carrying water down from a source older than any of the human arrangements built around it, older than the trust, older than the ranch, older than the names on the deeds and the filings and the foundation documents, older than the decisions and mistakes and corrections and slow accumulations of understanding that had brought the three of them to this particular bend of creek on this particular evening in December. There was something in that, in the indifference of the water, the patience of the ground, the way the land simply continued regardless of what the people on it did or failed to do. It didn't need their protection in any cosmic sense. It had been here before, and it would be here after. What protection meant, really, was giving the people the chance to stay close to it, to keep it in their lives and their children's lives, to not let the distance grow between a person and the ground they came from, because that distance, once it opened, was hard to cross back over. She knew something about that distance. She'd lived on the far side of it for a long time without knowing there was another side. The crossing back hadn't been graceful. It had involved a fraud investigation and a shareholders meeting and a mud-tipped heel and an 8-year-old who sorted puzzle pieces by color and told her the shoes were impractical. You came to things the way you came to them. The route didn't have to be clean for the destination to be real. Jackson's hand found hers at some point during the long quiet. No announcement, no ceremony, just the plain fact of it, the way he did most things. She held on. The springs ran past them in the gathering dark, and Lily's voice carried over the sound of the water, narrating the world to itself with the patient confidence of someone who was already sure that the people behind her were exactly where they were supposed to be. The light was almost gone. The valley settled into evening around them, and the foundation building on the Carver property would have its lights on by now, and Dale Pruitt's cattle were probably moving toward the barn 2 miles north, and Carl Henderson was probably sitting at his kitchen table with his coffee, and Linda at the assessor's office had long since locked up for the day, and all of it, the whole human arrangement of this valley, its histories and debts and protections and small daily choices, was continuing in the ordinary way that enduring things continued. Not perfectly. Not without difficulty. Not without the constant work of people who had decided the work was worth doing. Just continuing. Which was, in the end, the whole point.